Now, let's welcome to the stage Peter Sund. He's the CEO of FISC, that's the Finnish Information Security Cluster. So during these next two talks, the idea is to take a societal perspective on cybersecurity and then just drill down. So we'll be hearing insights on everything from policy to practices, industry-agnostic strategies, health-specific topics. We'll take a look at cybersecurity, not just on a national level here in Finland, but also globally with examples of recent incidents. And these are things that illustrate the types of threats that exist in the health industry as digitalization expands its risks in the security area. Without further ado, I will give you Peter Sund.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for having me and having us out here to talk to you. As said, I will approach this issue from a little bit more wider perspective. Of course, Petteri already offered us a very good landscape, not only horizontally but also in time, meaning that there has been decades of I would like to say progress, but the progress is not always positive, as we know. But before I start discussing more about the actual topic at hand, just a brief introduction. Like I said, my role is to operate as the CEO of Finnish Information Security Cluster. Finnish Information Security Cluster is an industry advocacy organization, and we operate as a branch association of the technology industries of Finland. Technology industries of Finland has several branches, and altogether we represent roughly more than half of our annual export of Finland, and 1/3 of the GDP in Finland. So all branches included. So there is a quite extensive industrial capacity, of course, residing in Finland. I have worked all my life in security, as you probably see already from my worn out face. I started also not as long ago as Petteri did, but already from the times when digital was not really the center of security. And my role has grown from virtually 1% to 100% of digital nowadays. And my perspective to these things is not only technology, but also, let's say, more wider perspective, as I have also, in my earlier career, almost everything that I have done in security and in digital security has been somehow connected with cross-border issues and international cooperation and so on. So I'll keep this as a sort of central story. Firstly, like Petteri already mentioned, I would like to point out one issue. When he was talking about the fact that Finland is aging, technology is needed, we will not have adequate numbers and we are not having adequate numbers of human personnel to run our healthcare systems and services and other things like that. But there is also a maybe more wider story behind. If you look at the statistics on the left-hand side here, this is a bit simplified, but what those tell you is that the thick blue line is Finland, and compared to some other regions in the world, we have suffered for more than 15 years of inadequate productivity development. So it means that something has been ongoing in Finland, that our productivity has not increased. And when you dig deeper into these information, you'll find out that especially, and this is not to blame anyone, but as a fact that much of the contribution has unfortunately been on the public sector, where of course healthcare and health technology are most associated with, at least in Finland. And that is the case which sort of shows us that it's very difficult to imagine a realistic scenario where efforts, especially technological efforts, would not play a significant role in increasing productivity. So that is one of those aspects that I would like to sort of leave with you. Maybe this is obvious to you in the first place, but nevertheless, sometimes it's difficult to sort of see this through, for example, the political landscape, when, for example, Finland is now, for the next 3 years, will be implementing most of its additional public resources to train and educate healthcare professionals instead of tech experts. This has been a political choice. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult to see the sort of underlying story. And that actually takes us to an area where there might be also necessary to rethink a little bit about what is the environment that we actually operate in. And I have put here a simplified example of the sort of domains of infrastructure that we often refer to, be it hospitals or be it some other, for example, energy sector or logistics or whatever. That the traditional infrastructure, this we understand and this we know very well. Everybody understands what is a railroad and what is a regular road and so on. The digital infrastructure is partly easy to understand. Data centers, telecommunication networks, and so on and so on. But then we come to the sort of third domain, which is where we like to call it soft infrastructure. That how is that actually sort of forming the ways how we operate digital businesses, how we create digital services, and how we utilize the sort of digital aspect in the first place. Business models, interfaces, software, as you know, software is eating our world as we speak. Various standards, as we all already heard, data spaces, for example, the healthcare data spaces, interoperability issues, not only semantically but also legally, and so on and so on. Plus, of course, the regulative landscape, which I will come back to in a short while. Petteri mentioned also that some things have improved, and they indeed have, and this is not a counter argument. But when we look at the bad actors, be those the ones who want to blackmail you for the data or some other reasons, for example, industrial espionage or some other activities, or just pure sabotage. It seems that at least the last 20 to 30 years, it's difficult to find actually statistics or information in the first place where the conclusion would be that the threat would have somehow diminished or decreased. So it still is, like Petteri mentioned, that the bad actors out there, and the more automated they get, the more threat we are facing. The numbers are increasing, efforts are increasing, and the negative outcomes are increasing. Petteri mentioned a knocking, an attempt to his server once every 10 seconds or so. If we look at the sort of national level in Finland, we can say that we have the similar sort of attempts to activate malware is roughly 3 times per second at national level. So if you really run, for example, live monitoring to in our networks, you can see that it is roughly between 2 and 4 attempts per second, and that is 365, 24/7, all the time, and that results, of course, in a quite significant total number in 1 year. Luckily, most of it is not successful, but it's very easy to make a mistake, like for example in the city of Helsinki case from last week. It's a matter of sometimes one mistake when the result. So hence, instead of in Finland we have this public service which we call cyber weather. This is one of our national agencies. They maintain this kind of service. It's an excellent service, but it's called cyber weather because it looks at weekly and monthly sort of situation about various domains in cybersecurity and so on. And that is, don't worry about the small. But as you can see, it almost always is like rainy. So maybe that's why they chose the cyber weather, because it is Finland in most cases. I think the ones who are visiting here, you're getting the wrong picture, I think, arriving here now on these days. So it's mostly rainy. Which leads us to the second issue. We have started to talk about not weather, but a cyber climate change. Because if you are seeing a constant change towards worse for 30 years or so, what else would it be than a climate issue and not a weather issue? And keeping this in mind for a few minutes, I'll come back to this a little bit. But before, maybe two more notions. Another is the fact that us security professionals, we are sometimes a little bit, if not incapable, but we are not very successful in communicating what security really means. And especially here in Finland, when in our own Uba-Duba language, we have only one term for security. In English, it's much more useful when we have safety and security, but we only have one word, and it's sometimes very difficult to understand what is it that we really talk about. So if you add the element of risk, then it becomes much more clear to sort of understand what is it that we are talking about. These are the bad actors. This is the threat side. This is, like Petteri mentioned, very, very difficult to manage. International efforts, international agreements, law enforcement activities, geopolitical activities, diplomatic toolboxes, you name it, virtually unsuccessful. Sorry to say, but it's really not working. For example, when we joined NATO not long ago, we were also invited to our national parliament to discuss about the situation and what is our opinion on it and so on as an industry. And what I said to the parliamentarians there, I said that this is nothing new for us. Our eastern neighboring country has been behaving irresponsibly for the last 7 years roughly at the same level as it is doing now in terms of Finland. So there's no news for us. The only news is that now also the grandmother of mine or somebody else's is also worried. That is the only difference, what actually has happened. So, but then we have vulnerabilities here. Human vulnerabilities, processes, and technology. These we can manage. And then in the end, that is how we sort of impact the element of risk. So the only thing that we can successfully do is focus on these people, processes, and technology. So, cybersecurity used to be a technological issue, and it was run by cyber experts such as Petteri and others who've been there for since the beginning, sort of noting that, okay, the first viruses, okay, maybe the absolute first ones, they were not dangerous, but quite soon they started to be. And it has been treated for a long time that it is somehow only a technological issue, that, okay, we get the sort of firewalls up, maybe some malware detection system, and then we'll just hope for the best. But it's not anymore. And as we have seen, like I said, that we are really talking about climate change. Also, the sort of political level, the decision makers have really sort of come to grips on this. They have understood that something has to be done. So now we have plenty of political decisions, resource allocation, resources, regulation, and so on, committed to this, because it's not anymore about only business requirements. It's not anymore about the legal requirements per se, because the society is dictating what the legal requirements will be. Because, let's say, the technology sector, ICT sector, by itself, self-regulating or not, has not been successful enough when you look at it from a further perspective, because the threat is still out there and the negative consequences are still out there, and there's a lot of them. So the societal needs are now shared, and hence, of course, the health sector has been one of those, let's say, more advanced areas, similarly to banking and finances, where requirements have been imposed earlier than to other sectors. And it's easy to understand, because it's about health and human life, right? So, so this has already been ongoing, and now it's widening to other sectors, and that is one of the reasons why I will sort of make a couple of comparisons by the end of this presentation. This is the EU regulative landscape on digital, as we speak. Yes, I know, very, very small text. Not important to see what the names of the regulations themselves are, but you see a lot of boxes, right? And that is enough. Each box is one regulation. Okay, so when we look at and the colors, it just means that the darker the color, the more ready the regulation is. Those blue ones are already in force. All right. So we have a lot of thematic areas that are sort of relative also, or connecting to the health sector. Industrial policy, connectivity, data and privacy, cybersecurity, trust and safety, and so on. These are all, in a way, interconnected, and many of these contain some sort of elements, some sort of perspective to the digital risk and digital security. So it's a lot, and it's very difficult to sort of understand all of it and how it is developing, because it's, for example, of course you can claim and say that, okay, we have, for example, MDR regulation or something, that it's the sort of core and essence that we follow this. But when, for example, we will have the Data Act that will force manufacturers to give out data and so on for the customers as they request it and so on, that sort of changes and shapes the way how digital systems work, and how the data is treated and created and shared and so on. So it's a lot of issues altogether. And this is an example from Finland. One organization was tasked by our Ministry of Social and Healthcare to study what are the elements that, for example, touch. This is only an example of what are the elements that touch, for example, the use of AI in the future. I was looking at it and then I thought that, does it really actually differ so much from the cybersecurity perspective? So hence I decided that I'll put it up there for you to think about it. That probably it's actually not so far away from each other that whether the use case is AI or security. There are plenty of regulations that at least on national domestic level impact on the things how we will sort of manage people or lead people, their competencies, the processes and the technology. So it's a lot to sort of grasp and get grips of how to operate in this complex world of various rules. Of course, everybody knows GDPR and what it did, but that was essentially one of those. It was the first really impactful, essentially cybersecurity regulation. We like to call it cybersecurity regulation because although it is about data privacy and it has elements that are non-digital as well, but if you sort of dig deep into what sort of privacy or data protection actually is in modern world where we have digital services and the data and the information is in mostly in digital format, it only means that data protection is essentially cybersecurity of personal data. So one can consider it that this is of course simplified way to look at it. Another example from for example new European Union AI Act, which is out and coming very soon. There is also a risk classification implemented in the regulation that everybody who wants to, for example, use AI systems in their products and services, they have to run through the risk categorization and sort of place their solutions in the right category. Well, it's all good, but if we look at more detail, for example, the health sector, we can see that virtually all health tech systems are high risk. So that is the outcome of the classification. There might be some certain use cases that this may not be true, but you can take it as a rule of thumb that it's high risk use cases. Plus that, of course, any general purpose large language models and those they also have then additional requirements that were included into the regulation essentially because of OpenAI. So that is the how it works. So it means that there has to be even more, and not only, like I said, not only technical cybersecurity issues, because the AI risk that you have to sort of run through the process, it's also about responsible use of the AI systems and the misuse of the AI system. So you have three elements there. And like said, making a comparison, these are some of the identified medical use cases in the category A. That means that it is really like in the center of medical use cases and patients involved in these examples. These are the descriptions, but this is not the point. Is not to read all of this. But if you look at that, all of these use cases, they highlight AI risk being high, like I said, but also the cybersecurity risk vector also landing on high because of sensitive personal data, risk of, for example, if the data is doing something wrong or the system stops working and so on, there is a risk of life and limb. So essentially the cybersecurity element is equally challenging. And I was given a possibility to borrow one slide from one of our member organizations called Bitium Corporation, which operates in several sectors, and hence I decided that it's a good, possibly a good example for this session as well, because they operate in the IoT field, in the military defense field, and also in health sector. And when you really look at it, that how the digital resilience is in the modern or novel way, what are the views that how this can be addressed? It seems that there is quite a lot of similarities, even possibly much of the same. So it really doesn't necessarily matter so much whether we are talking about military defense or the health sector. The elements are the same. Because of connectivity, we have to look at the sort of points of entry. We have to make sure that, for example, the edge and the connections and the interfaces to devices, that these are sort of managed well. And like said, in Petteri's example, the server that is running for test purposes is a target all the time. In a similar way, when you have like hospitals and other things where you really have, one can call it a production network as well, because there is plenty of devices that are measuring things and also supervising things and changing things and adjusting and doing things of that sort. We have the interfaces. These interfaces, for example, the SCADA element is one of the highly sensitive areas that we have to sort of understand and look at. Plus that also the wider corporate network, because in fact these are usually connected in one way or another. And one of the reasons is that despite of the fact that we can sort of voice that, okay, we want to be vacuum packed in vacuum, for example, in a hospital environment where we don't have open connections to the internet and so on. But the fact is that modern technology, if you want it to run smoothly, and if you want it to be sure that the devices themselves that run software are, for example, updated in the right intervals and addressing, for example, those software mistakes that Petteri was talking about, you have to allow the manufacturers to establish connections to those devices. And even if you wouldn't, it'll still be there. Somebody will still plug it in because otherwise the services won't work. But one good thing is that if there is any sort of sunshining amongst the clouds that I'm throwing out there, is also the fact that despite of increasing regulation also to these levels where we are talking about the devices themselves, these layers of technology, these are very, very difficult for the bad actors. The ones who are running for profit for malware, it's very difficult to get into this level and understand, for example, the data that is going on there, so all the protocols and so on. So it's usually somewhere higher up where the faults occur. And that it also makes it more easy to sort of manage when you understand what is it that you're looking for. Who do you need to partner with? How do you develop your own solutions and the services so that you're addressing the right fault points to increase cybersecurity. Plus that it's the everyday work, and this is a generous quote from Microsoft, one of our member companies as well, that because they analyze a couple of trillion data points every single day. I think it's around 3 trillion or whatever the amount is. They are able to sort of come up with some data that backs up the conclusion that is still 99% of problems can be managed with the sort of basic security hygiene. And why I'm saying is that more and more, when you look at, for example, European Union regulation on different sectors, including the health sector, it's actually addressing these and a couple of other ones additionally. So this is a good thing, because it means that we are at the brink of converging the requirements of what is needed to have safe and secure digital devices. This is very positive news. But of course, it has to be understood well, because it's easy to show a slide, but quite difficult to manufacture a device that actually is able to implement all this. And then we also have other things that sort of showcase the same, that it doesn't have to be hugely expensive. If you look at, for example, the return on mitigation, these are digital services that, for example, the same company, Microsoft, offers. I'm using it because, not for advertising purposes, but because everybody uses Microsoft services in one way or another, in professional or free time or study or whatever. And you can see that the return on mitigation is that it's almost free of charge, almost no cost to implement certain controls, security controls that have a very high percentage of impacting the security. So what I'm sort of saying is that the sunshine part here in amongst the clouds is that it's not so overly complicated as, for example, quite often media would like to get us understand. We mix military defense there. We talk about NATO. We talk about, what happens in Ukraine, what happens in Palestine, what happens in, I don't know, other places too. And then we need the military comes in and does this and that. It's sort of, it's wrong layer that we are often focusing on. This is the correct layer to really look at the communication networks and the computer systems, at what is it that you do so that you can actually mitigate the risk. And this is the point where I would like to thank you for listening in for a moment.
Thanks so much, Peter.